here's
what's he do with the baking soda?
Well, here's the saying. He goes, what does he say? A handful of baking soda to the arse and groin will often yield the tenderloin.
There you go. That's a great saying. So he admits
he's a bit of a poet.
He doesn't go a bit of a poet. He's a bit of a wordsmith.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, it's almost food plot season, Jared, and Deer Grow is one of those products that has really changed the way that we plant food plots and the success we've seen from them.
No doubt. I've been, trying to plant food plots my entire whitetail hunting career, which is a little shorter than yours, but the minute that I started, or that I realized that I could get Deer Grow back into some of these remote plots where I couldn't get lime or fertilizer, especially in the 50-pound bag, format. Mm-hmm. So everything was changed. I could get into these spots moving forward with a backpack sprayer, and that's since escalated to these 40 or 60 gallon sprayers, and we're doing upwards of 5 to 10 acre food plots just with Deer Grow and having phenomenal success.
Yeah, and I mean, with the price of fertilizer, lime, diesel, everything this year, I mean, what better way to get in there and grow a successful food plot at about a third of the cost? Check out Deer Grow at deergrow.com. And we're back.
Hey.
On our podcast, episode, 78?
78 is right.
78. It's crazy. We're thumbing back through. That was you. You were thumbing back through some of the podcasts yesterday. And we're just looking at potential guests coming up and stuff. And
yeah,
got a lot of them stacking up.
Yeah. Well, we've been doing it for, about a year and a half?
It's funny. You go back to those first couple where we're here with the mics on the table. They weren't even on.
Yeah.
we're just talking, and it just sounds like pure echoes across the room.
Yeah. Technology's come away. Shout out to Corey Horn for
Corey hooked us up,
helping us with our setup. But yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it sounds good. Whether what we're saying is right or entertaining or
probably
anything.
Probably not. Yeah, it's entertaining to us.
Yeah.
No, I think it was cool. I mean, I know when Nick and I were talking about it, the last few, I think we've gotten some really good engagement from listeners on, at least on YouTube and social and stuff. And so, yeah, whether you agree or disagree with us, it's good to have that engagement and start to, see what people are thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I think, I don't know if it got taken out of context. I guess it was the last one that we talked about, the hunting brands and the industry and stuff.
I think so.
77. And, I think most people got what we were trying to say there. And it's not saying don't be brand loyal, because I mean, there's certain brands that we're loyal to, paid or not paid sponsors. We just and we believe in those brands.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of if you're not in this brand, you don't get to hang out with me type of thing.
I saw someone made a comment about, and I didn't know this, that Jason Harrison started Sitka as well.
Yeah, one of the originals.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then branched off for the KUIU stuff.
Mm.
Yep. And I think it's cool. Obviously, I think that there's certain apparel, whether you're talking about KUIU or Sitka, or
was that old pro that said that?
No,
I think it was.
No, it wasn't.
I'm still banning your ass.
Yeah, he didn't know anything. He doesn't know anything. And you're banned. I think that for us, it always has been. I mean, a pattern is extremely important for sure, but it's also fit. Dude, we've
I don't know if it is important, man. The more that we go on.
The pattern?
Yeah.
What are you going to do, Jay Gregory, a red flannel out there?
I think you'd be fine.
You're crazy. No,
I don't wear camo mule deer hunting. We've never had an issue.
Yeah, no. Well, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure I killed it in this T-shirt.
We didn't kill shit 2 years ago.
Well, we didn't see shit either.
We did. We just couldn't stock them in grasslands.
Yeah.
No, I mean, listen, I've gone on the research side of the visual aspect that, I think that the blues and grays are no-nos, and I mean.
Can you see what you can pull up on it? I don't know how easy it's going to be to find that, but see what you can find about deer's vision.
It's blues
I've
and
heard
greens.
that.
Blues, greens, or blues, grays, purple. The blue ultraviolet spectrum is what it is.
I've heard blue and yellow is what I've heard.
I don't know about yellow. I know blue for sure. Gray as well, because it has blue in it. That spectrum is more visible. I think that the big thing is that, I mean, anyone who's listened to this is always, whether it's movement or not, you've had that deer pick you out in the stand and just lock in on you.
It's been a while.
I think that's because you wore Predator.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't have whatever, a baseline to test against. But
yeah, I mean, I most people have had it happen, whether it's movement and they catch you or they just pick you out. And it doesn't even have to be a buck. It could be just that, old blower doe, basically.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's enough research around it that breakup in color, especially the UV side, is definitely affecting that.
Using common sense, it makes sense that would be the case.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, that's where, and again, if you think about even a predator, which I think has a great breakup pattern, if you're using like brown deception?
Yep.
Is that what in our early season makes no sense, right? Because like if you look up, it's full canopy leaves, like you're not breaking yourself up. If anything, you probably stand out more, which I think is where we wear that green or whatever in the early season. So, I think every pattern has an advantage and disadvantage. Ultimately, especially like when we're mule deer hunting, I think the reason we wear this stuff is because we just want to be comfortable. We're going to put on miles.
I think it's funny that you bring it up because I've considered it recently here, just like wearing T-shirts and long sleeve stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I've killed plenty of deer in white V's.
Well, have you?
Yeah, on the ground.
When
I was a
tees?
kid, yeah, I used to just like sneak up to this field in white V's. Like, because I was a band kid.
That's crazy.
So I'd have like a flat bill and white V and my bow and like no shoes and jeans. And I would just like sneak up. I've killed like 5 or 6 deer that way.
That's nuts. I remember like growing up on that stuff, I would almost always have to, like, I felt freaked out if I didn't have my face mask. Like if I did, like,
oh, well,
and then I stopped wearing them completely.
So
then I went to face paint, obviously.
Yeah.
And then eventually it was like,
well, that's been my progression too is, dude, I stopped wearing face paint. I stopped wearing face masks maybe, I don't know, 10 or more years ago.
I agree.
Because I just didn't like it.
Yep.
Truthfully, what it was I had my motocross accident, and then I just didn't like stuff touching my face. After. So I switched to face paint.
Mine was always anchor point. I didn't like that, like bunching up and everything, like when I'm trying to get my anchor point.
Yeah, sure. And so I switched to face paint because I was like, well, look how cool all these dudes on TV look. In hindsight, not really.
Sure.
And then I just got fed up with having to take it off every time.
Yeah, that was a pain in the ass.
So I just stopped wearing it, and I noticed no difference. And so now I don't wear any face paint, no face mask, and I haven't had a deer pick me out and have it like blow the situation in a long time.
And I think we're pretty conscious about the wind when we hunt, which plays a big factor in that, because most people will say, well, I wear whatever, a scent lock face mask because I don't want that odor from my face and my head pushing out to the deer. Well, it's like, play the wind correctly.
Sure.
But they don't.
Well,
John Eberhard.
John doesn't play that's right. Yeah,
I guarantee John has a full like head mask. He does.
I like John a lot. He's one of my favorite people we've had on the podcast. I just don't believe that he is getting away with what he thinks he is with as far as the scent control stuff. Maybe I could be. I've been wrong a lot.
He's like one of the only guys on the face of the planet who doesn't emit odors out of his body.
Maybe. Well, dude, there's some crazy stuff that guys do. Listen, my uncle, and I'm not bald yet, so I don't want to do this. This guy, and my uncle's one of my biggest inspirations for bow hunting. He eats, and I don't mean to give away any of his like secret sauce here, but I don't know if it works or not. Yeah. He eats chlorophyll pills.
Is that the stuff that like knocks you out? Chlorophyll?
No, that's chloroform.
Oh, chloroform.
Close. Yeah, chlorophyll is what plants have or use to convert sunlight to energy. That's photosynthesis.
Yeah.
And so I think in conjunction with that, he doesn't eat much red meat during the season. I don't know how steadfast he believes this, but he thinks that prey animals potentially have the ability or a heightened sense for animals that eat meat. So predators.
Any carnivores or omnivore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
interesting. So he's on
there's a whole process here, and he won't watch this, but it's fine. I'm not blowing up his spot. So, dude, he's serious about it. He will go.
That's funny.
And so he'll do no red meat during the deer season, chlorophyll pills. Rubbing alcohol to the head.
Really? I feel like that admits a big odor.
Some kind of alcohol that kills bacteria.
Mm-hmm. 151.
And baking soda.
Oh yeah, I've heard the baking soda.
Yeah. Well, here's
what's he do with the baking soda?
Well, here's the saying. He goes, what does he say? A handful A handful of baking soda to the arse and groin will often yield the tenderloin.
There you go. That's a great saying. So he admits
he's a bit of a poet.
He doesn't go a bit of a poet. He's a bit of a wordsmith. So he avoids the gold bond, goes straight for the baking soda.
He mixes them.
Oh, yeah, wow.
I think I don't know if it's straight gold bond, but he mixes baking soda and baby powder.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
Because baking soda,
yeah,
right to the butthole is a little rough.
I assume,
a little rough.
Unless you're making a cake.
Right. Right.
That's it. I mean, that's serious. And I mean, people have, like, again, I guess you go back to, like, when I was using face masks, like, that was kind of my superstition. I remember getting in the stand and be like, holy shit, I forgot my face mask. And I felt like the rest of the hunt was just blown.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I don't have it. Like, I'm screwed. Like, everything's going to pick me out. Obviously, now, in retrospect, like, I killed plenty of deer without that. But I would say people have superstitions around, like, I guess for one, and whether it works or not, like, I love, and I think you do too, fresh earth wafers.
I do.
But
yeah,
you've gone to smoke recently.
Yeah. I think
like over the wood burner smoke.
Mm-hmm. Well, dude, I don't
know if that's a superstition as much as it is like you feel confident about it.
Yeah, right.
And I think that confidence yields tenderloins.
It helps.
Well, because you go into it and you feel like, all right, I've done all my things. I've done everything right. Like, this is my advantage.
Well, I just think that you have a better chance of like distracting or covering up a scent than you do eliminating
100%
your own. Like, I just know, like as humans, I mean, any animal, but especially humans, like, dude, we emit so much odor.
Well, think about it. I mean, if you walk a half mile to the tree stand, anytime it's above 60 degrees, like, you've got some sort of perspiration or odor coming out of you.
Yeah. Even if you don't, like, if you're just...
It's on your skin.
Even after you
your
shower.
Skin particles. I mean, there's dead skin particles always flaking off of us.
And I think the main one is, like, it's coming out of your mouth.
Sure.
Like your mouth, your orifices. Like,
well, people used to say, eat apples. Did you ever hear that? Like, eat apples when you're in a stand for, like, your breath.
Yeah, makes sense.
Sense. My dad used to smoke cigarettes, so
there's got to be. Well, yeah. Well,
and kill deer. Like, I literally have watched him take the cigarette out of his mouth, put it on a branch, draw, shoot a buck, pick the cigarette back up, and smoke.
Yeah, dude. I bet that deer seem to know, and I don't know, maybe different regions of deer, like they learn after certain X number of bad experiences with a certain smell or something. But I think generally speaking, like, people know deer know what people smell like, and they associate that with a predator.
So I think that's a good point because
see, because I've thought this too. Like, there was a period of time where I was like, well, coyotes are predators, and like they're running through bedding areas day and night all the time. It's not a big deal.
Well, out west we see coyotes running, and there's deer standing right there looking at them.
They don't do that with people, though. So there's a difference. They know that we're smarter than coyotes.
Well, I think it's also comes down to where you're hunting. So, like, when I grew up hunting, I was in an urban area a lot, or suburban area. There was people all over the place. Like, I hunted right behind a high school where there were kids getting off the bus all the time, and I would kill a buck within eyesight of that high school. And I don't think that those...
Would you put the back window down of the bus?
I've had bus drivers, like, clap as I've shot deer previously. But, I mean... Those deer were just surrounded by those odors at all times. And I mean, I think maybe they were easier to hunt because yeah, I mean, if you're in the middle of the woods further away from that, it's kind of odd that you would see, but I mean, there was human odors all over the place.
Right. They'll tolerate it.
Now, if you go up to like where Steve Shirk is in the middle of the Allegheny National Forest, that's a foreign odor, I think. Yeah. And maybe they don't comprehend what it is, but it's not right. Right, it's not supposed to be in that area. We've had that talk. I think even Kansas is kind of the same way. Like, there's places in Kansas when we get deep into there, like, I don't think that some of those deer have ever smelled or seen a person.
Or it's way more frequent than like a rural or a suburban area.
Correct.
For sure.
So
yeah, I agree with that.
I think that we're same with the Dakotas. Some of those mule deer, I don't think I've ever seen a person. That's why they stare at you and they're like, what the hell is that?
Yeah. Well, and some of them, you're right. I mean, the chances of come across a deer that's never seen a human, for us at least, is...
I think in most places is a rare occurrence. I mean, maybe in some of the big woods of like Pennsylvania, Adirondacks in New York, some of the swamps maybe in the South. But like most deer at some point in their 1 year of life, let's even say, come across the human.
Mm-hmm. I think what we experience in the Dakotas and in Kansas is like, those deer have seen or smelled humans, but they haven't had nearly the negative experience that, let's say, a deer in Ohio or Pennsylvania has. Like they smell deer, or they smell people rather probably fairly frequently during the deer season. I mean,
oh yeah,
in the months of October, November, I wouldn't be surprised if a 3 or 4 year old buck has a fair within a 200-yard scent experience, like a negative one with a hunter, like probably every 2-3 days.
I would agree.
Right?
Yep.
2-3 days.
And maybe he isn't even a hunter. Could be the farmer. Could be the guy checking his property line. Could be something. But
sure, they're just aware.
They're pressured. They feel that. They associate that with some sort of negative experience.
Yeah, and those ones out in like more remote areas, Kansas, the Dakotas, they don't have as many experiences, and so they're not as freaked out by it.
Yeah, they're alerted by it, but they just don't know.
Like, you can get away with a lot more out there. It is weird. It's like on either end of the spectrum. It's those middle ones that are tough. Like a suburban deer that smells people all the time, you can get away with stuff because they're used to that smell, and so you can just kind of camouflage yourself in that. The ones that don't have as many negative experiences with it are just kind of naive to what it is.
Yeah, alerted, unsure.
The ones in the middle that know what a human smells like and knows it's not good. Yeah, those are the tough ones. That's Pennsylvania.
Well, I mean, I'd say that's 80+% of the whitetail range.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That you're looking at on that.
Minnesota, for sure.
Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, all those places. Yeah, I mean, I think it's unique when you get into these. And every deer, I think, is also different individually too. I mean, there's certain deer that I've encountered that like. Before they even step foot out in front of like where your scent cone would be, they're on freaking high alert. There's other ones that just, they could give two shits about what you're doing or what you smell like, until they get hit with that. And then they're like, well, what the hell's that? Might be too late by that point.
Yeah.
And I think that probably increases with age too. Why a 2 or 3 year old buck may be a little hesitant, but not nearly as hesitant as a 5 or 6 year old buck who's had multiple experiences and encounters with that. I think the more encounters they have over their lifetime, probably the more hesitant they are to be, out and around that kind of scent.
Yeah. Yeah.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt Archery.
Dude, where would we be without our Hoyt Bows?
Probably shooting crossbows.
or a Matthews, yeah.
One and the same.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, we love being Hoyt guys because you stand out. When you're in this room full of other people that shoot these other types of bows, I feel like the Hoyt guys just stick out.
Dude, it's just a legit bow. I mean, especially that carbon riser, man. I mean, I know that they've got several other aluminum lines as well, but for me, I'm shooting that RX5 in the carbon model. They've since come out with the RX7, and I can't tell you how much I love being a Hoyt guy amongst a sea full of Matthews guys. So we're out there, I think, proving them wrong, shooting 80 pounds and killing stuff.
Hey, man, if you want to get serious, get Hoyt. It's an interesting concept, but we kind of derailed there on the apparel side. But I think that's a big factor in it. And I mean, I think most hunters would say that they do some sort of apparel care during the season, whether it's smoke treatment or washing it with whatever UV or unscented or fresh earth scented. There's some sort of apparel care and handling around that.
Yeah.
And some guys take that to the extreme where, I mean, they'll walk in with like base layers, everything in a pack. When they get to the base of their stand, they'll put their clothes on and then climb up in the tree. I think,
there's,
is that superstitious or is that like a methodical strategy?
I mean, no, it's methodical. I mean,
you see Eberhard. Eberhard doesn't it's like bagged in a thing, like doesn't get touched until like he's out of the vehicle and like working towards it. And then before he gets back to the vehicle, he, clothes are off back in.
I think for me, it's like, like I will acknowledge that there's guys that probably do a better job of like scent control. Eberhard probably being one of them, but it takes away from it for me. You know what I mean? It's just, you can obsess over that one aspect to the point where it's like taking away from the fun of it. And I know that I can kill deer with my level of effort that I'm putting into that. And I try to like make up for it in other ways. Like, for example, the way that I access a stand, maybe I'll put an extra effort there, or the way that I've hung a stand or camouflaged myself, or whatever the setup is. I would prefer to focus on that aspect of it than to be 100% scent free. So like, or for example, like, dude, I'll hunt a stand on the wrong wind for what's the word? Like in theory, you know what I mean? So you'd say deer, stands here, deer's probably coming from the north and I'm hunting it on a south wind. Okay. Yeah. So,
in certain situations.
Well, and so very specific situations is kind of what I'm getting at. So a lot of people will say, well, that's the wrong wind.
100%.
The way that I look at that is like, okay, if it's the right spot, and if that's the right tree, and if the right deer is in the area, I know that that's traditionally the wrong wind. But I also know that there are situations that will allow me to hunt that stand and to give that deer his perceived advantage of the wind. It has a lot to do with thermals. So like an example,
morning thermals rising.
An example of where I would hunt a stand like that is, there's a million different scenarios here, but if I know that a buck, usually it's the morning, almost always.
So you get thermals rising.
Almost always it'd be the
your
morning.
Advantage.
Yep.
And
so I'm looking for a high pressure morning. So after a system has moved through, that low pressure system has passed. Now the pressure's rising, which my understanding is thermals have a lot to do with it. At least that's my observation. It also seems to be very correlated with deer movement. So I know those are mornings to be in the woods. That's when I killed my deer this year on November 2nd. That's what it was. That one was in the afternoon, but same. So in that situation, I know that I don't think bucks can perceive that as much as we can, the thermals. I know that they use thermals, but I think that they think they have the advantage when the prevailing wind is coming in their direction, even though I know my thermals are coming up for a period of time.
Well, that's why you see buck beds in places that are favoring prevailing winds. And then when the situation arises to where thermals, I won't say cancel out, but definitely balance out that prevailing wind, that's where you do have an advantage on it.
So what do you mean?
So, so you've ever, I know Steve does it all the time. You walk through and you're like, this is a buck bed. And you can picture why, because prevailing wind is over his back. He's looking down this way, like everything's. But then in a morning on a rising thermal, that prevailing wind is essentially balanced out or canceled out because your thermals are rising and basically will push over that deer, your scent from where you would be. So even though he's sitting there because prevailing wind is typically over his back and he's looking down the hill, ultimately in certain situations where the thermals rise and carries that scent over top of him and you're hunting in a situation like you said, which would be normally the wrong wind for that spot, you have the advantage.
Yeah. That's such a common scenario that, like, dude, if we could get across to people, if they could understand, like, at least some of the areas that we've hunted, I want to say 60, 70% of the buck beds that I found seem to be in that type of a scenario. As long as there's terrain, and it's worth it for that buck to be there to be able to see. It's on a knob, essentially like your military crest. Guys like world's greatest farter.
Oh, Infault,
and there was a DVD put out a while ago from those Hill Country Bucks.
The Hill Country Bucks guys. Yep.
And I think the hunting public went down this route for a while too, just really diving into understanding this. Is that those bucks and just deer activity in general is going to be like at that military crest. For exactly those reasons that you mentioned is because of a prevailing wind coming off of, let's say prevailing wind is from the west.
Yep.
So on an eastern facing hillside at the military crest, so, right where that comes over and the thermals in for the better part of the morning will come up and rise. And so there's a tunnel essentially along that, and so they feel safe there because the wind is at their back. They can see all the way in front of them.
Yeah, easy escapes on multiple areas.
They're going to have escape routes. And so, like, the way to set up and hunt that is left or right.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Just know which way he's going to go and access it, knowing that he's going to get up and probably continue either on down that or down into
Yep, head right into it.
And the other beds that we see there is no line of sight. It's strictly a swirling wind bottom.
Yep, and it's thick.
Mm-hmm.
Thick
and then you get in there and you're like, oh, there's wind swirling everywhere.
Well, and you just have to look at the situation. So like that buck over your shoulder, when I killed him, it was late October. I effectively didn't know that deer was there, but the deer I was hunting had been bedded on one of those like military crest types. I got in between him and the primary scrape that they were hitting.
It's perfect.
Front came through.
You didn't even know it, but it was perfect.
Yeah, front came through while I was in the stand. So I knew wind was coming out of west-northwest, so it was set up perfect. Front came through while I was on the stand. I'm talking like blazing wind, rain, etc. Well, of course, the instinct of those bucks are as soon as that to pass through, it gets sunny, I got to go refreshen that scrape, right? It's late October. And like the moment that passed through, there's a buck. I ended up seeing 9 bucks that night.
What a situation, dude. And that only happens 3-4 times.
And the nice part was the wind died. So like it probably was swirling a little bit, but because it was evening, it was pulling, that thermal was pulling me back behind and he came off the top. So there was no possible way of him ever, catching my wind, unless I let him get behind me, which I didn't, obviously.
Yeah. Well, and dude, such a great way to observe this for yourself is, and obviously we didn't come up with this, is milkweed.
Yeah.
Anything that allows you to track wind or thermal direction longer than, a lot of guys use these puffers.
Sure. And I use puffers for a long time. And still, I have them like when we're doing like whitetail stalks, or I'm sorry, mule deer stalks, and like the wind's strong enough that I'll puff just to make sure that but I'm not worried about it carrying whatever, 300 yards.
Sure.
That milkweed, and anybody that's used it, watch that. And like, it's not a straight linear path. Like you see that thing
amazing. It's
rise, fall, turn. Like it's wild how that ends up pulling. And then look where it lands and you're like, holy shit.
Well, what'll happen too is like, depending on your terrain, like for instance, you're in a valley in the morning. And so like there's probably not a lot of wind. Mm-hmm. And so you'll drop it and you'll see it kind of just, if there is any wind, maybe it sucks this way.
Mm-hmm.
And then if like it's in the morning, so the thermals are rising, so you'll watch it pull up this next valley over here. And then once it hits the top of it, it hits a prevailing wind and then it goes
right back
this
down.
way.
Yep.
And then maybe there's a terrain feature that you see it come back down in the valley and then it just swirls out there at 100 yards.
I think that's one of the hardest places to kill a buck is in one of those bottoms.
It is. That's why they're in there all the time.
I mean,
that's my farm in Ohio, dude. It's rare to see a mature buck not using a major drainage as its primary.
Yeah. And I think that because of, and this isn't calling all hunters or all whitetail hunters lazy, but because of ease of access, most people are hunting those bottoms.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to walk straight up a hill to get to a top.
That's where the trails are at.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, it's easy to look at and say, oh, deer's here.
That's where the fields are at.
Yeah.
Right? That's where your tillable fields are and stuff. I mean, I've followed that right now in Ohio. I've got 8 acres straight up the gut of my farm. The easy, solution would be stand right here, big bean field, brassica field here, and kill that buck in that bottom. The reality is that wind is all over the damn place.
Well, okay, so there's some terrain features that I think you can use to your advantage. The biggest one's a hogback.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're following primary drainages around a property and you're like, okay, this is clearly access, wherever that valley gets split by a ridge, and they all do.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially think about a valley that turns into 2 valleys.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle is a hogback and an interior ridge. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times there's a trail that goes right up over the middle of it.
100%.
That's where I killed a Spaniard. Yep. Same thing.
I know exactly where one is on my new Ohio farm, right at the end of the ditch. And again, most of those areas, and we all want to hunt, right? But like most of those areas are almost impossible to hunt in the morning, especially if you've got food in those bottoms, because you're just going to push deer out unless you can come in from the backside. Like you can't just walk right up the gut to get to a back piece because you're just going to blow out every deer that's in that bottom feeding.
Right.
So you've got to anticipate it being an evening spot to get up on there. Or I've actually had a lot of success in the rut on late mornings where I'll wait until, deer kind of funnel out of there, 8:30, 9 o'clock. I'll sneak up into that top, and then I'm in there to catch those bucks kind of cruising that ridge.
Yeah.
Looking for does.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you have to forego times that are probably the best, knowing that you're just going to screw it up. And, I still, I think we differ a little bit on opinions here, but like I still believe that the first time in a spot is the best time in a spot.
No, I would agree.
Yeah. But
I would agree.
You are okay though, I guess, hunting a spot repetitively.
During the rut. Yeah, once you get into a certain phase of the rut, I think it's about time on stand and the right spot.
Mm-hmm. And I'm a bouncer for sure. I move, I bounce to try to get into a fresh spot a lot, which I think each has its advantages and disadvantages.
Sure. Well, I mean, neither of us are right or wrong. You know, while I do believe that the more time you put in on a very good stand during the rut, the greater your chances are of killing it. But I also believe that the first time into a spot is the best.
Is the best.
100%.
Yeah, so you have a diminishing return, but...
Especially during any time outside of the rut. You know, once a mature buck has smelled you coming into an area, they don't like that.
I know, man. And I was on a streak. That buck started it. I think it was 3 years running. Actually, no, there was a buck before that. But there was 3 years running that I did not hunt until like late October, early November. And first time in each of those spots, it was kill, kill, kill. Hang and hunt, kill, kill, kill.
Yeah, remember.
And it, you know, it was weird because I had to restrain myself a little bit to not hunt when it was too early. Like I literally was waiting for the right conditions. And then where it basically left me was there were several years, you know, I think it was 2016, 17, 18. I killed bucks first sit in Pennsylvania, each one.
Yeah.
19 and 20.
Good bucks, mature bucks.
Yep. I waited and the day never hit.
Yeah.
So, you know, next thing I know, it's second week in November and I haven't even hunted, you know, but maybe one time. And it was like, well, shit, now I'm out of time. And, you know, I think some of the best hunters you hear maybe on a consistent basis in an area, you know, they will risk it all for 1 or 2 days. And those are the 1 or 2 days that they're going to try to kill buck. You know, I know Winky's always said it's November 7th in Iowa or whatever. And Bill's one who, you know, unless he's got a buck patterned early, like he rarely hunts before, October 20th? You know, so... you know, you're waiting for those right days before you end up, you know, putting your presence in an area.
Yeah.
And on your farm, though, I think we've done that for a while. And then eventually we were like, wait a minute, the best days are like waning in the opening.
Dude, listen, all that has to happen for you to be successful at bow hunting, like in a given year, and I know success is defined by, but to kill a mature buck, you just have to get within 30 yards of him, you know, or whatever. It doesn't matter what the wind's doing. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Doesn't matter what the wind, doesn't matter what the weather. Like he just has to be there. Like he could be in a bit. That's how you kill one. You know what I mean? You get within 30 yards of them. And so like so much of bow hunting and like our scheming and strategy is around like using all these factors to our advantage. But ultimately it's not the factors that kill the deer. You know, it's being within range of them.
That's it, man.
And so there's all different kind of ways that you can get creative with it depending on the property type is a huge one, specific deer personalities, your hunting strategy, whether it's a box blind or a tree stand or a saddle or a spot and stock. There's a billion ways to do this thing. You know, that's the fun part about it.
Well, and I think, you know, at the end of the day, it still comes down to a shitload of luck.
A lot of luck.
Right place, right time. You know, again, we beat that horse to death, but like, first of all, the buck has to be there. Right, you can't if you're expecting to kill a mature buck and there's not a mature buck on the area, you're never going to kill one. It's a fact.
So I mentioned the hogbacks. Let me do another one. So the second one that I've encountered is I don't know if you would call it a saddle or like just like multiple drainages.
We time out for a second.
Sure.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Stealth Cam.
Dude, where would we be without our cell cams?
I would definitely be divorced at this point.
Yeah, I hear that.
I mean, the fact is I spent more time checking cameras than I actually did hunting prior to cell cameras. Now, at least, my wife can enjoy me being in the comfort of my own home, buried in my phone, checking those pictures.
Yeah, 100%. And dude, when it comes to trail cameras and definitely cell cameras, reliability is, I think, the number one thing that we're looking for. Stealth Cam just has a long reputation of reliable cameras, and ultimately that is the most important thing to us. They have to work.
In terms of reliability, there's not a better camera on the market than Stealth Cam, whether you're talking about the Fusion X, the Reactor, or the DS4K Transmit. And most of them are under $200.
Southcam.com. Check them out.
Okay. Second feature you were talking about.
Yeah. So I don't know if you, are we good? I don't know if you call them like, I don't know if it would be a traditional saddle, because typically those are looking at ridges.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a perpendicular crossing over a ridge would be a saddle, a low point.
We talk about that on like our Kentucky lease, where it's like steep, like big mountain, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's that cut over that the deer are using.
Yep. And so saddles are great. I don't know if this is exactly what I'm talking about, as much as it would be a convergence of multiple ridges ridges too, but ridges make valleys.
Yep.
So valleys. And I'm talking about a rut stand here, essentially.
So like valleys dumping into like a main drainage.
Yep. And it's one of the easiest things to find.
Still hard to hunt.
From a map. And they are hard to hunt, and the wind will swirl. But if you're willing to give up like one of those ditches, that would be your access. If you can. The trick too is, with anywhere that you hunt, dude, is access. And unfortunately, my farm is this. All of our access is from the west, and it puts us at such a huge disadvantage, because all of the terrain falls away to the east. And like there's just no way to get into some of this stuff unless you had access from the east up and in there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Not that it was like the make or break of my Ohio farm. There were other features I liked about it, but all of my access is from the east on my Ohio farm. Now I lose some access that I'd love to have from the south, at least currently from the south and north. I can get in. It's just, it'd be a little bit more cumbersome, and I'd probably risk bumping some things. But my primary access is from the east, and I guess you and I say that because in most places, prevailing wind is west.
Yeah. Usually it's like southwest through the month of October, and then you'll get some northwest around fronts, and then we do get east winds. And
we get east winds. We get a lot of south winds occasionally, and
I took that from Heartland Bowhunter. You never trust an east wind.
We had in fact, it was around the time you killed your buck. We had several days when that front just kind of sat over us, that big cold front in the first week of November. And we had several days of east winds, and it was like, what the hell am I doing with this?
I didn't.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think that's where, what's so interesting. First of all, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean,
the day I killed my buck, sure.
Well, no, not necessarily. But like, I'm sure we all, one of the things we do the most during the season is check the weather, right? Check the weather, check the wind.
100%.
How accurate is what you check for your area when you get to your stand in terms of wind?
Well, you have to know the terrain and how it's going to affect it.
That's the big piece. And I think most people screw that up. They immediately go to it and say, okay, weatherman's saying today's southwest wind. You get to your stand and you're like, what the hell? It's like straight south.
Yep.
And it's probably is southwest. It's just terrain is funneling it to seem like it's a straight south wind.
Yeah, dude, it's so cool. Like, in the same way that like, if a contractor or like an electrician could see through walls, like they'd be a millionaire, The same is true for a deer hunter, I think, and thermals, and not just thermals, but
wind.
It's not even just wind, but yeah, the way that the atmosphere moves around terrain. Because dude, it's so important. Like you said, if it's calling for a west wind, chances are 70-80% of the time
westerly.
It's a westerly wind. And if you're on a ridge, that may still be the case.
Yep.
At least at your point, you can use things like milkweed to see after your point there how that's affected. But yeah, I think that just comes with time or understanding of terrain and knowing how different wind directions or thermal situations are going to affect what happens there. And that's exactly what I'm saying is an understanding of that will enable you to hunt a spot that seems unhuntable.
Well, and I think most people will understand that and learn that from mistakes usually.
Sure. That's the only way to learn it.
You talk about giving up wind or hunting what is perceived the wrong wind. I think one of the best cases that I've had, and I've killed multiple deer like this, is I hunt a lot of like top of ridges, right? And I will hunt with my wind blowing straight over my shooting lane quite often because it's a narrow ridge and that wind is blowing over that deer every time.
Sure.
Like if I let milkweed go, it's sucking 15 feet in the air and then dropping down over the hill on the opposite side of that ridge from me. So I'm hunting with the wind straight at my back, blowing over top of my shooting lanes, and then it gets sucked down into the valley.
Well, and
often.
I don't know if this is your mindset or not, but anymore for me, I think way less about where the wind is right for me, and way more about where it's right for the deer. Because I've hunted good spots so many times where the wind's right for me, and in hindsight wasn't right for the buck, and I never saw him there. And then I've hunted spots that I was like, oh, this is a mistake. I shouldn't be here. Sure enough, here he comes.
Here he comes.
And so when you start to realize how heavily a mature buck especially will rely on the wind and just in his nose, the faster you'll be more efficient at finding spots to ambush them, because it's not, I'll never say never, but like, dude, if there's a spot that the wind is always right for you and isn't right, like an example would be, you're on a far side of the field, wind's coming across the field, and I don't know, you're hoping this deer is going to come out with the wind to his back, essentially. It's not going to happen. They don't do that. A mature buck, almost 100% of the time, is going to, the telltale sign of this is if you've ever, go look at a food source, whether it's anything, any kind of a destination that a deer is going to end up at. And if you go downwind into the woods 30 to 50 yards, you're going to find a parallel trail that they're getting up out of their bed and walking almost as far as they possibly can.
Yeah, it's not the shortest distance between the 2 points by any means.
At all. They're gonna cover that entire thing with their nose, and at the very last possible point, they're gonna enter the field when they feel that it's entirely safe. Here's a great example of that, dude. There are some spots that like are just deadly for that exact reason. If you can figure out that they're doing that and find a way to access it and take advantage of it with a stand, and it may be on a wind that you, without knowing this, would be like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to hunt it.
The Thompson is a perfect example of this. Okay, it's like a, I don't know what it is, 30, 40 acre woodlot. We've had some giants down there.
Lots of ag around it.
A lot of ag. It's just a woodlot, and it's got a weird L in it like this. And the whole guy here is alternating corn and beans. And on the years that's beans, what happens is they'll bed just down in the bottom of it. Ultimately, down in this woods there's a creek bottom, and it's thick and it's nasty. And they'll bed down in there. They probably can't see much. They can smell everything though. And so my guess is that they do that on west and southwestern winds, which we get a lot of.
Sure.
Okay. And
most of spring, summer, and early fall.
Yep. And so the way that we have figured out to hunt that is to access from the southeast. Okay. And I take a fence line to the north. Yeah, to the north.
To the north, yep.
All the way to right where this field meets the woods. So I'm all the way at the corner of it. And then my stand is literally 20 yards to the northwest of that. So,
yep.
Woods is like this.
Funnels them
right
down.
here. And I'm hunting that on a southwest wind is okay. A lot of people would say that's perfect.
Yeah.
A south wind is even better because I know that those deer are beyond comfortable knowing that they can walk this entire parallel trail from west to east
till they hit that point,
knowing that they can smell everything in that field until they've covered everything. That I smell the whole field. I can smell. I can see everything below me, and then when they finally hit that point, they say, "I'm good," and then they'll come up in here, whack.
Yeah, I think, and there's always exceptions to the rule, right? I mean, deer do crazy things that, are almost unexplainable in some cases, but from a pattern ability sense, the way that those deer use their noses to those advantages, whether it's directly into the wind or into a crosswind. I've seen a lot of mature bucks using a crosswind essentially to cover more ground. I think that...
What do you mean by a crosswind?
So essentially, like, let's say wind's blowing directly out of the north, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of that deer coming straight from the south, it might be coming from the southeast or the southwest.
For sure.
Right? Catching that at an angle coming across.
Well, because think about a deer can't possibly be walking in directly into the wind 100% of the time. It's not possible.
100%. Well, but guys think that. But guys will hunt knowing or believing that the deer is going to come straight into the wind, right? Most often isn't the case. It's usually coming in from a crosswind.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that when you start to understand how these deer move, and again, there's the exception to the rule, whether it's, a buck chasing a doe and, him kind of throwing, hell, I killed a buck a few years ago during the rut where, there was no reason to kill that deer. He had known I was in the tree. He had pegged me 3 or 4 different times, yet he was not leaving that doe's side.
Yeah.
And that doe drug him right through my shooting lane, and I killed him. Mm-hmm. And so you've got those kind of, exceptions to the rule. But ultimately, if you think about how a buck is going to move using the terrain, using the wind, it's one of those things that I do a lot of hanging hunts, but I think that once you understand those fundamentals, you probably could pre-hang a lot of sets successfully.
100%. I sent Jeremy a picture of one of the bucks that was down on that bottom. If you want to pull up teams and see if you can pull that picture up on the...
Is that 8?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right, though. I do hang... Any of the pre-hung sets that I have are in those types of situations that...
And again, for ease of access, I'd rather pre-hang. I'd rather be as quiet as possible. Yeah. I'd rather spend as little time on the ground as possible and slip into that stand and be emotionless, before way before it's time for shooting light.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's hard to do if you're using a saddle or a hanging hunt, but it sure is a lot easier if it's pre-hung.
Well, and I'll say this too. In Ohio, you can bait. You can also bait in Kentucky and Kansas and probably a few other states. And, while we don't rely solely on baiting, there is a time of year and a situation where it's definitely the most effective means for killing a buck in an area. A mature one, too. I know there are guys that say you can't kill a mature buck over corn. Yes, you can. I promise you can. It's been done a lot.
Yeah.
And you just have
It's not easy. It's not as easy as people who haven't baited think it is.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
But it is possible.
It's hard. These are the situations.
That's a stud.
Yep. It's giant. And so that camera is facing...
Northwest?
South. Yeah, so it's on the woods facing into the field.
I gotcha.
And so... You can see how there's kind of a rise behind him there.
And that was corn or something up there, right?
It was probably beans that year. So that's just, kind of a empty
grassy
field.
Yeah.
And so that wind's coming out of the southwest over that rise and down into the woods where he was bedded.
That's what I was going to say. And one of the things, because listen, it doesn't matter where you hunt. Once you get into the season, and whether you're actively hunting or you're on public land and somebody else is hunting, or you're on a piece of private that multiple people are hunting, the moment pressure comes in as a factor, it's going to affect these logical theories, right? One thing that I try to pay attention to, and it's not as much now, but when this was probably August that you got that picture?
Yeah, probably.
July and August especially. September, it starts getting funky because bachelor groups break up. I really like watching how bucks come in and out of areas or even use of trails in July and August because they're super unpressured at that point. And they're still following their natural instincts of wind to the nose and things like that. Like, just because we're not hunting them, they don't stop thinking that. And because they're unpressured, it's one of the best times, I think. Now, I'm not saying you're going to kill that buck, but it's one of the best times to understand, okay, a buck, let's take last night. That buck was coming on that trail, okay? It was a dead west wind last night because we had a big storm front coming through, right?
Talking about this?
That Ohio buck I sent you last night from my farm.
Yep.
Big storm front was coming through. That buck was coming from the northeast into southwest. So crossing, that wind was basically coming across his face from the west. Just knowing that, and that's not the first buck that's done that. I've seen several bucks doing that, whereas I've not seen a single buck go the other way. right? Come from that way going out to another spot. So again, maybe it's not that particular buck that I end up hunting or somebody ends up hunting up there. But ultimately, I know that on a west wind, those deer are using that ridge coming from the northeast essentially to the southwest. And so when I think about October and November to hunt that area, I'm going to be thinking about, okay, west wind, this is how those deer are coming. I'm going to give up this backside because I've not seen a single deer use that way to this way. I'm not saying that they won't, but from a pattern ability standpoint, this is how I want to hunt this, and I bet you have a chance of killing a buck that way.
Yeah. These are, fundamentals that are so important, not from just a hunting standpoint and strategy, but in the breakdown of like a new farm, or a place that you're going to hunt. Like a lot of times it can be overwhelming to say, well, I've got this 170 acres to hunt, and it's a big timber tract or something. And you're like, I don't even know how to start to break this apart. If you look at the topography of a property, so in that example right there, not only can you derive that, okay, because of these trail camera pictures, I know that they're coming from northeast to southwest on a western wind. You can also derive that they're more than likely bedding on an eastern facing hillside.
100%.
Or a knob.
Yep.
So, and if you can start to look at your map and say, oh, okay, well, to the north, there's only one eastern facing drainage or ditch or knob like that. More than likely, that's a good place to think that he might be coming from.
Yeah. And in that
so all
case,
of a sudden you've got a 170 acre map that went to like one spot.
And in that case, I know that where he came from ends at a knob, which then goes down into two pretty thick ravines that are east facing, and eventually at the bottom will be my main food source.
Here's the other thing too. I was just thinking about this last night. There are spots, and we've killed deer out of a spot that we call the pinch, and it's just a lot of bucks just come through it for whatever reason. It's a nice pinch point. The problem is we almost never have the right wind. Like it has to be out of like the north. You need like a straight north wind to hunt it. And even then, it just seems like it's switching all the time. And you can get away with, a few times in November and stuff. And like I said, we've killed deer out of it. But, and maybe it's 5-6 years now we've been doing it. And just yesterday I was thinking to myself, why are we doing that? Like, why am I forcing that spot? Even though we've had some success at it. I know we've blown a lot of deer out of there too. Why wouldn't I just get up on the next ridge that's easily accessed and that I can see? I can see it easily and just call it those deer. I think that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah,
it makes way more sense. That's the same principle applies with those hogbacks. Is maybe those deer do continue on either one of those ravines rather than cutting up your hogback. But you still have the opportunity from October 25th to the end of November at least to be able to call at them. And almost I think you can have a lot of success calling at deer off of ridges like that.
I think that we've been forced.
Like a Winkies, Death Ridge.
Yep. We've been forced to do it. Kansas, obviously. I would say our Illinois trip probably as well, where we've purely pulled up, a hunt stand map or whatever.
That Illinois spot that I hunted was a perfect example of the drainages coming together.
And we've been forced.
Didn't see a damn deer.
Well, I was going to say, we don't know anything about half of these spots. We're forced to say, okay, we know there's a big deer in this area, right? Or a shooter likely in this area. And so we pretty much hunt based on terrain and what we think would be favorable to the deer, right? I mean, that's when we look at a map, we're going to say, okay, here's how we can access. We know that this spot is favorable to the deer. I would say we locate the spot first. Then we think about how are we going to access it. So whether it's the ants, right, where we're like, X marks a spot. We know this is where we want to be. We know that there's big bucks in this area. Then we think about how to access it. Whether it's the flat where I killed that buck 2 years ago in Kansas. Now, I would have never told you that deer would have walked the exact same trail that I walked in on, which is why I gave it up.
Happens a lot.
I gave that up thinking that they were going to be coming essentially through this, small funnel, and that deer walked the exact same trail I did to the point where, and this was a pre-hung stand that we put up, months before?
What deer is this?
That 155 or whatever I killed in Kansas a couple years ago, first morning.
Yeah.
Down on the flat.
Yeah.
We pre-hung that that hawk stand.
Which way was your wind coming? Off the field?
No, it was coming from the west. So it was coming up the ditch into the thicket. Yep. And that deer came from the south, directly south, which is how I walked in and walked under my stand. I killed him at 3 yards.
Yeah.
And that was a mature buck, 5-year-old buck probably.
Yeah.
And, so you're going to have these kind of outliers, but we knew that spot set up for the potential to see a buck and probably call to him. Our thought was he was going to be up in those cattle fields, visually would have seen him, called at him to try to bring him down into those fields. But ultimately you have to at least be head on the swivel to know that, deer aren't going to follow the script every time.
Sure.
And so whether it's him coming underneath you and you figuring out how you're going to kill that deer, or, where you put one off a pretty boy's back, I don't necessarily know if, that was kind of a, did you think he was going to come from that direction? Had you anticipated the deer coming from that direction?
I mean, that was one of those spots where they could have come from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But no, not necessarily.
Yeah.
No, I guess not. What happened with that one was, we started at a different spot that I still think is good. In fact, I'm going to end up closer to that this year, I think. And I had hit that buck. I think it was a low heart hit or, whatever it was. It was unfortunate, but I ended up blood trailing that deer down and eventually bumping him.
In that thicket.
Regardless of what happened with that deer, I think that deer probably lived a few more years. And so that led me to this new spot that after seeing it in person, I'm like looking at how this lays and I'm like, whoa, like this is worth looking at. And so I look at it on a map and there's like this X marks the spot, like obvious spot here. The problem is the only way to access it is, from across the river. So that's how we got on the kayak path, and that's what I did. And it was just one of those. I mean, dude, I don't know if it's just Kansas or anywhere in the Midwest. We'll stick with Kansas for now, I guess. But I mean, dude, if you can get on a secluded river bottom, and if it's got adjacent fence lines or edges or something,
it's a funnel.
Even better, they're gonna come through there.
It's a funnel.
And so they could have come from anywhere. They could have paralleled the river.
And you were doing all day sits, so I mean, they probably were changing where they came from throughout the day.
Yeah. Dude, those big bucks, man, they own their territory, and they're going where they're going. And in the rut, like usually it's with the wind. Sometimes they're just going. And I think that's kind of what happened. I don't even remember what direction the wind was going, but it wasn't blowing right at him. I know that from my side. But he came right down this open fence line and just hopped the fence right in front of me. And I just I whiffed, because I...
and again, unanticipated. It was, 1 o'clock?
Yeah, I was on the phone with my wife.
Yeah, it was like 1 p.m.
Saying I wasn't seeing anything.
Slow day. Yeah, I mean, those are the days that, when they do come from an unplanned direction. Well, I remember, because I think I killed one the same day in Kansas when you killed Spaniard in Ohio. And you knew.
Same day, was it?
It may have been you killed one day and I think I killed the next. But like we talked on the phone before you were in the stand. We both were. And you were like, I'm going to kill this deer. Like he's using this hog back. He's going to come by me. And it was like an hour later, you're like, yeah, I killed him.
Yeah.
And he came just like you thought he would. Straight behind you on the hog back.
Matter of time.
Yeah. Right through there and boom, there he was.
Yep.
And I mean, so you have deer that kind of run the course. And I think that's cool. Like, I mean, guys get excited.
That was a fun hunt, man. I killed that deer at like 6 yards.
I get excited when I know that I've got him pegged. Right. Like I know what he's doing. I know he got it pegged, and then I just have to be patient to wait for the conditions, right?
Yeah.
There's other places like Kansas or when you take a hunt somewhere else that you don't hunt often that you just got to get aggressive. You have to think like the deer. What's he going to do? And then you got to figure a way to get your ass in there.
Yeah. Well, that's where I like to say the rut comes down to a spot.
It does.
And that's where my principle of like time on stand in the right spot during the rut is.
It gives me nightmares the last year, dude, because I was in this. I knew I was going to kill that 200-inch deer. I was in his honey hole. And if you looked at it from where I was, it would have been like, the hell are you sitting here for? Like, I mean, I was in a old walnut tree with like 4 foot tall privet underneath me. And like, there was made no sense to sit where I was, you know, I mean, but it was as clean of access I could get to get as close to where I thought he was using often.
Yeah. Well, and you know, had you put more time in at that spot or
I would have
been able to do it, you probably would have killed him, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I had him at, 45, 50 yards for 2 hours, watching him fend off that 150-inch 10-point from a doe. In hindsight, maybe I could have slung one at some point, but, you just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and I'm telling you, man, so I can't wait till November. Like I heard that like tending grunt come over the hill, and I knew I should have thought at first like, oh, he's with a doe, but I just heard the grunt and I had just called, so I didn't know if he was responding to me or whatever. But in hindsight, it was a tending grunt. But when he stepped out on the trail at like 80 yards, I was like, oh my God, that's the biggest deer I've ever seen. And I thought for sure it was a cut grass trail, mowed grass trail. I thought for sure he was going to walk right out, and my trail intersected that trail, and I was going to kill him at 22 yards.
Yeah.
I thought he was going to come straight through broadside at 22 yards, and I was just going to smoke his ass. And, he had that doe with him, and he was fending off another buck, which was walking a gravel road essentially as a satellite deer.
Yeah.
But you didn't have to overthink it. I mean, there was, what'd I tell you, 6 other guys hunting that buck on 150, 200 acres max.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's a lot of pressure there. It just came down to you had to be in the right spot. And I passed on a stand. I hung a stand that I thought was better than the existing stand in place. Had I been in that ladder stand, I would have killed him. He would have walked right by me at 20 yards.
Yeah.
But who
Happens.
knows? Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, man, I think like encounters like that and just experience, time on stand, I think, I guess teaches you that, like, I think a lot of guys go into the woods, like, on hopes and dreams.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, oh, deer season, I'm going to see, hopefully see a big buck and I'm going to shoot him. And
I mean, I used to be that guy.
And it does happen. But, the way that we found to be successful more frequently or with some form of consistency is to try to eliminate as much of the mystery as possible. Work with real information. What deer are there?
I think that's the biggest one, man. I mean, and we've heard that from how many different people that are like, well, I'm holding out for a 5.5 year, but I hear that. I say that to myself in Pennsylvania.
My dad says that all the time.
And I'm like,
where's the 150? I'm like, I don't know.
There isn't one. Yeah. I mean, if you think about Pennsylvania for the longest time, I was like, I'm going to kill, I want a 5.5 year old buck. Well, last year I didn't have a 5.5 year old buck on camera anywhere that I was hunting in Pennsylvania. So essentially the options were don't hunt, like, cause you're not going to kill it, or lower your expectations, and ultimately I spent more time with the kids hunting than I did myself hunting in Pennsylvania, at least. But it was cause I didn't have a target buck. I wasn't, and I know people will give us shit on this probably because they're like, well, yeah, but that's not why I hunt. I hunt to be out there and enjoy it. 100%, as do we. That said, like, everybody has a goal when they get to their stand, whether it's to kill a buck or kill a mature buck. Mine's to kill a mature buck, and so why would I sit on stand for days and hours on end if there's not a mature buck there?
Sure.
Just a hunt?
Making too much sense, yeah.
I mean, and people will say, yeah, well, because you love hunting and you want to hunt. And it's like, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to change my expectations.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hunt
There's nothing wrong with that either.
I'm not going to hunt a 5-year-old buck for 5 days in a row in Pennsylvania in my vacation if there isn't a 5-year-old buck to kill in my area.
Yeah.
I need to change my expectations.
Well, and there's always the possibility that, like, we don't know all the deer. There's always
100%.
The chance.
Yes. Yeah, new buck moves in. We see it every year, new buck moves in. But, I mean, it's rare not to have seen or know about a mature buck in an area prior to really putting effort into hunting them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, we spend enough time, like, we have enough, cameras running and relationships with surrounding landowners that, like, we're generally aware of what's there for the most part. I mean, dude, things definitely happen.
Well, this is where bow hunting and gun hunting are complete opposites. And it's nothing against gun hunting because I still gun hunt a lot. I love it. But in gun season, for the most part, it is a pure shit bag of luck. That's where Joe Schmo goes out and shoots a 5-year-old that's 180 inches. He had no idea that deer was there. It was pure luck. He sat in a spot. Goose was a great example. Like, I didn't know goose was there.
Yeah, it depends. It happens probably a lot more than in bow season.
It does. I think it definitely does. Now, that said, man, there's nothing better than a surprise buck showing up during bow season.
For sure.
You know?
Well, I don't want to just... I don't know if it's fair to blanket statement on gun hunters, because I think
it's not gun hunter. It's gun season.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
The season itself is more prone to moving deer further because of pressure and people killing deer that
they're not aware of.
Or defy the rules of buck moving.
Well, and I think there's a few things that impact that.
Okay, what do you got?
Well, there's quite a few actually. Probably number one is yeah, there's a lot of them. Not necessarily in this order. Okay. Number one would be, I don't think, generally speaking, that gun hunters that aren't also hunting during the bow season have as much information about the deer herd.
Agree.
I don't think that they spend as much time or money monitoring the herd year round.
I would agree.
So generally
doesn't
speaking,
mean that they don't know those deer exist because they talk to their buddies or
care about them
hunt.
any less. They just have had less opportunity to be aware.
Yep.
Number two, they have a greatly extended range.
Huge.
And so the chances of them...
hundreds of yards greater, usually in most cases.
Yep, being able to identify what deer it is with less information to start with, there's just, generally speaking, a greater chance that when you walk up on that deer you just shot, it's not going to be either the one you thought it was or one that you even recognize.
Correct.
Okay. Number three, time of year. Generally, these gun seasons come in... Post-rut, when mature bucks get up and go for a loop. I mean, not that they won't do this earlier in the year, but like...
They're seeking at this point.
If there was a time of year that I think mature bucks or just bucks in general are vulnerable outside of their core fall ranges, it's like Thanksgiving week, the opener of gun season.
They're searching for those last few days.
Goose, like you said, is a perfect example. I think he spent 90% of his time on this farm, and it only took a day-long venture for him to go out and follow a doe out there that he got killed by a gun hunter that had never seen him before.
And that was what, like 3 miles?
Yeah.
3 miles away.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you had seen this deer on a almost daily ritual, or at least weekly ritual.
Yeah. And not at all to say that makes him mine or
no.
That I have more of a right to him at all. But that was just my observation. He was there more. I was very familiar with his what I thought was his core area, and he got killed way outside of it. One of the first times that I saw him leave it. And so there may be more, but...
That big buck that we just showed at the Thompson got killed, what, a mile?
Yeah, and that had to do more with a fall range shift. I think he summered there, and then he
shifted and fall.
Just spending more time. And a girl killed him with her bow on October 28th, which is awesome. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, and I think the last one that I would have in there, and it depends on where you're at, is pressure.
Sure.
Yes, those deer are venturing around, but if you get into like opening day or opening weekend of deer season in Pennsylvania or Ohio or Michigan or wherever, people are ambushing the woods that haven't been there for months, and those deer get booted and bumped,
100%.
and eventually they show up in a place where they may never been before. Thus the vulnerability, and that they're not familiar with the area. They're still using their senses. They're still hitting that wind, crosswinds across their nose, but they're not as familiar with that landscape.
Yeah.
And it puts them at a disadvantage for sure.
It's kind of funny to consider like a mature buck walking through a new property he hasn't been in before with tree stands everywhere, and he's like, "This is a bad part of town.
Yeah, this is not.
I probably shouldn't be here."
Lock the door.
Yeah, rolling his windows up.
Yeah, he's like, "I should not be here."
Yeah,
man, and I would assume that's where, it's been that discussion for a long time.
Why did we get on that? Why was I describing that?
Well, I think we were talking about just when you start to look at bucks and in the huntability of a buck in particular, like a specific buck, when those factors come in, pressure, excursions, change of food sources, whatever, it's hard for the hunter to adapt to that, because you've put so much effort into patterning based on the information you have in, September, October, November, and then boom, it changes. And now you're forced, everything you've done for 3 months has relied on this predictability, and then it goes out the window. And that's not to say that the rut isn't predictable.
It's not. For the most part. Well, I think it's a transition. I think
there's a point of the rut that is predictable, and then there's a point of the rut that is completely not predictable.
Yeah. I think the way I look at it is like in the early and late season and most of the year, deer are predictable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can find
creatures of habit.
You can identify some type of pattern. During the rut, I think spots are predictable. Deer aren't necessarily. It's very hard to say a specific deer is going to do a specific thing. It's way easier to say deer in general will act this way around a certain spot. And that's why, starting November, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, through Thanksgiving, I think it's way more about spots than it is about specific deer.
Yeah, man. And it's so crazy. Like I've got, honestly, one of the best times on my little 28 acres here in Pennsylvania behind the house is around November 4th, 5th, 6th. And I've started to go back through my cell cam history, and like typically on one of those days, doesn't matter what the weather conditions are, I will have a mature buck show up on camera cruising.
Isn't that funny? I've got a few spots like that too.
And it's like, these are deer that I don't know. I've never seen before, and I mean, if anybody's kind of looked at our social back in November and stuff, if you remember, like I found some giant ass rubs on my property. I mean, monsters. I don't know what, I mean.
It's your wife out there with a garden rake?
Yeah, probably. Just driving me crazy.
Like, maybe you should just stay home from Kansas this year. It seems like there's a big buck out here.
Yeah, it's just a bear back there. But I mean, but outside of that, way before, especially before that, there's not shit that I would ever hunt. Kids got plenty of bucks to kill. There's nothing I would hunt. After that, sporadic, but those 3-4 days, I probably need to park my ass in those woods and, just based on history, know that there's likely a buck going to come through there that is mature as well. And so I think as people start to think about, number one, that's where cameras come in handy and being able to collect that data. Again, you're not going to be able to capture everything that happens in those woods. But, I mean, if you're relatively good at placing cameras, you're probably going to get enough information to say, hey, between November 3rd and 7th in this area, there's always a mature buck that cruises here.
I think you can definitely kill a mature buck in a spot like that. But if you have the opportunity to spend more time where he is most of the time, your odds are obviously going to be increased. Like I think all of us have hunted a deer and said, I know he's spending a majority of his time in that bottom on the neighbors or whatever. And so while you can kill a buck there, and a lot of times that's what you have to resort to. We don't own, we don't have access to everything. If you can spend more time in a deer's core area, your odds of success obviously are going to be higher.
Well, and I think that goes back to even during the unpredictability of the rut, 9 out of the 10 deer I kill during the rut are deer I know of.
Yeah.
That there is that flyer that shows up and I've never seen before and I kill them, but almost every deer in retrospect, it may not be nearly as predictable, or he may not even be in the same general wood block that I thought he would be in, but I know that deer. I've seen that deer before, and he was one that was on my list, essentially.
Yeah, you brought up a good point there too of seasonality or timing, and not maybe seeing a deer until or maybe that sign, even if you don't have a picture of the deer, didn't show up till whatever it is. A lot of times, this history or knowledge of a deer that we're talking about is not even in the same year.
Agree.
It might be an understanding that, hey, there's this buck that seems to show up on October 21st, or within a week of that every other year, and maybe it's October 10th, and that deer was a 3-year-old last year, and I haven't seen him. When, not that you can always count on him showing up, but like generally they do. Generally there's some kind of an annual cycle that deer will. I kind of think that there's at least 3 primary ranges of these bucks, at least in the areas that we hunt. And those are summer range, fall range, a rut range, and unless the food exists in the same place, a late season range.
Yep. Well, and I think that is what always,
and they overlap a lot of times.
Yeah,
but not always.
That's what always I think comes back to this whole: do I plant summer food plots and stuff, right? Because
you know where I'm at on that.
Yeah, I know where you're at on
Do you?
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You. I mean, I don't,
generally no, I don't. I'm thinking in your situations, those type of properties that you like, the big Kentucky ridges. Yeah, some summer food that doubles as fall or late season food.
Well, see, that's where I was going to go, and I think you're in favor of that too, right? If you could plant,
dude, if you had a Kentucky knob with no food and a 5 mile surrounding radius, and you could put 5-10 acres of beans in there, you freaking better.
Yeah, and I think that would benefit you early in the season, and I think it would come back and benefit you late in the season.
100%.
So yeah, I mean, in those cases, I'm all for it.
But on my farm, and I was just out there a couple days ago, I got 14 cameras out finally. So there's no need for additional summer food.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, though. You have food. Now, you would be up for leaving some of that summer food so that you have a late season food source.
100%. In fact, I probably will purchase some of it from the farmer for that purpose.
So that's where my disagreement with Sturgis is, I guess, is that I'm not necessarily looking at summer food for, let me bring all these bucks in the summer and have them there and keep them there type of thing, as much as I'd like to have that nutrition. I'd like to be able to provide that to the deer. But also, I know that come December, January, that grain is going to be a major food source.
Yeah, and so what do you think? Sturgis would just say Brassica's puts off more tonnage. It's a better late season food source?
I would assume so.
It's fair.
Yeah, I would assume so. And again, agree and disagree. Like if I get a 2-foot snow, that brassica is tough to dig down to. If those beans have standing pods or that corn has standing grain on it, it's a lot easier for a deer to access.
Yeah. And it's more, that's at that point, it's more of a discussion around quality of late season.
Yeah, and I don't think he's going to say, well, yeah, you don't need that in the late season. He would say you agree. It's just, it comes down to, number one, I think cost efficiency. You know, if you've got the choice of what are you going to plant, plant fall plots. I mean, that's what fall annuals, massive tonnage in the hunting season. If you've got the resources to be able to plant some summer plots, then add fall plots in, and those summer plots then prevail into late season as standing grain, then I think he would, as well as Higgins and Strickland, everybody would agree, yeah, do that.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and that's where, like, I think we're not taking sides here. It's cool to see everybody's opinion and information based on experience. You know, it's the thing about deer hunting, and this kind of goes back to when we were talking about content and who to trust and stuff, is that, man, think about your Ohio farm versus my Ohio farm, or where you hunt in Kansas versus where I'm hunting in Kansas, literally a mile apart. Like, each of those spots are so situationally based that what you apply probably isn't what I would apply.
Sure.
You know, and so it's these broad stroke statements that come out that I think is where people get hung up. Yeah. I mean, in no disrespect, because it's cool, you know, from a deer grow perspective, in the last 3 weeks, the amount of people who have wrote me about planting buckwheat, knowing that they're going to kill that buckwheat later and then put brassica into it, because that's what Jeff Sturgis does, is astronomical. Mm-hmm. You know, and when do deer grow? When do I need to, you know, should I put it on for buckwheat, and should I also do, that's probably the best. But I would say in certain situations, like a guy called me from Kentucky, similar property to mine, and I said, hey, you know, have you planted your buckwheat yet? No. Well, tell me about your area. Well, I've got this. It's exactly like mine. I was like, have you thought about planting forage beans in those areas? Well, I mean, yeah, but, you know, I'm thinking I need to worry about fall plots more. And I'm like, well, I'm not disagreeing with that, but like there's no summer food source besides natural in your entire area, and it's big timber. I personally think that you could plant a forage bean in 5 acre. He was planting like 5 acres.
Well, dude, here's the thing about fall plots in those types of settings, like a timber ridge. Mm-hmm. There's a whole region there. I don't know how far it stretches, but it's probably like southwestern PA, mm-hmm. southern Ohio, mm-hmm. Kentucky,
mm-hmm. West Virginia,
like
the
part
Appalachian,
of Tennessee. That whole deal where there's not a lot of agriculture, it's just a lot more timber ridges. Mm-hmm. I mean, dude, if there's acorns or hard mast,
which there mostly is every year.
There's no food plot that's going to beat that.
None. Which is where, like, again, if I'm planning a food plot, I'm almost setting myself up for December, January, when those acorns are not as attractive.
Yeah, or even late November.
Yep. Whereas September, October, acorns are raining. They're on them. They're eating them. And so, yeah, and it's trial and error, right? I mean, what works on my property might not work on yours or the next guy's. But I think if you start to look at your landscape level, right, and what are people planning, if you're in an area where there's a bunch of different hunting properties, right, and everybody's putting brassicas in, why are you going to put brassicas in? I mean, everybody else is putting brassicas in. How are you going to differentiate yourself? Maybe you put in forage beans so that come late season, you've got standing grain, they've got all brassicas, and the deer are piling into your 5-acre bean field.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying don't plant
even
brassicas.
That's complex. Well, I mean, so here would be an example of maybe why. So if I plant brassicas and my neighbor plants brassicas, but I've spent a lot of time doing TSI and investing 100%. In early successional habitat, I have the cover.
Other factors to it.
Then my food is better.
Yes.
Even though it's exactly the same.
Yes. Yep. 100%. Or you have better soil too. Better soil, better nutrients in the plants. That's going to be more attractive to deer.
Right.
But if you have more deer on your property and they mow your brassicas down early, then they're moving off your property.
Right.
That's where it becomes so situational based, that these broad brush strokes, take with a grain of salt. I think in theory they make sense, but you've got to look at your current situation.
Get specific, man. Dude, the biggest buck killers that I like, dude, Ben Rising, I think is such a good role model for how to kill big deer. He just is very specific about it. It's like there's no broad granted, he does claim to believe in the moon, so there's one red flag.
We'll give him that one.
But other than that, he's right on it. He's like, man, it's just a goat that lives in the woods that is good at smelling.
I think Ben, first of all, he hunts a specific deer. He's not just out there hunting bucks. He hunts a specific deer.
Out here hunting bucks.
Yep. He is zoned in on that deer, and he knows that the deer is in the area. Once he knows that, he goes to the map, and he says, I think he's here.
Yeah. Ben's got woodsmanship like it's nobody's business. He understands.
Which is why he's so successful. Steve Shirk, I think, also does that.
I do too, yeah.
Steve is one. I mean, look at him right now. He's posting mature bucks in velvet in national forest ground. And Steve has
some giants. Gets me excited to go hunt with him.
Steve's got woodsmanship to where he knows what he's looking for, and he'll be the first to tell you where he's getting these deer now will not be where he gets these deer in October.
And you know what helps with that a lot, dude? And the people that know that are the people that spend a lot of time in the woods, not necessarily hunting. But okay, here's a few of them. Loggers, you know what I mean? which Ben is. Us, the more that we spend time on a variety of properties for real estate, cruising properties, just the more terrain you see, the bigger data set you have to work with to say, oh, maybe that property I thought was really good isn't that good because here this one has this or that, and not that you should be stacking your property up against everybody else. Like sometimes you have what you have, but you should also try to understand or be realistic about what you're working with, so you can try to maximize what you have. And
I think that's where the summer stuff does come back, because I mean we've all drove past a giant soybean field and we're like, oh my god, look at all of those giant bucks. That property might be shit during hunting season. It just might be
for sure.
And so it's just because they're there in July and August has nothing to factor in when it comes October and November. And so I've got plenty of people that will say, and I think you and I've seen that now, even like working, especially in late spring and summer on some of these real estate properties, that we walk in and we're like, there's not a buck rub or old scrape anywhere on the property. There may be deer there now. Like I see a bunch of tracks, there's cattle trails in there, but I don't see any buck sign, which tells me during the fall, they aren't there.
I don't know if it's Sturgis that preaches this or who, but I think there's a lot of validity to like saying that mature bucks spend a lot of time in the summer, obviously where food sources are at, but where there's way more I mean, dude, where I see bucks bed in Ohio in the summer is adjacent to large agricultural food sources in early successional habitat with high canopy cover. So this would be sparsely
shaded, cool,
shaded, grassy, bowls or
nothing that's going to beat up against their velvet. That's
low stem count
sensitive.
stuff, exactly. And then in the fall, they seem to transition more into. And I don't know if it's literally because of this or if it just happens when their antlers calcify and they're no longer as vulnerable to breakage and stuff. They seem to push right into those
high stem
thickets,
counts,
gnarly thickets that we think are like impenetrable, and they'll just thrash through them,
tunnel through them. Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what you have to pay attention to, and it starts now, man. It's, if you're listening to this, it's, I don't know, July or June 15th, something like that.
I don't know if I told you. So when the whitetail guys were out, we were out shooting my agent profile, and we pushed into that spot that I really like.
The brushy one?
The brushy one that I just was like, I just like the property. I found a sick spot.
Yeah.
I mean.
Is it close to where we thought?
Yeah. It's. So if the road runs like this, the creek runs like this, this is ag, this is a gnarly pocket.
There's like a wood line.
Walk right in here, right there. It's like, it's one of those spots where it's like, I don't know why I didn't realize it the first time I walked through it, but when I was standing there, I was like,
that's the one.
There's all these brush lines coming together, and like you can see so far, it's got really good access. Wouldn't you know it? I look over and there's screw steps in that tree from the old leaser. So they had it figured out.
Well, and I think that's where.
I was looking at a tree maybe 20 yards away, but they were in the right area.
Yeah, I mean, it's out there, man. It takes time. It takes time. It takes experience. It takes failure to understand some of these opportunities that exist, and it takes
access too, man.
I mean, if you're limited to what you can hunt, I mean, you only can work with what you have. Yeah. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. And just your expectations should be in check with that. I mean, dude, if you have 40 acres to hunt, the chances, I mean, depending on where you're at, but around here, Ohio, Pennsylvania, the chances of you having a mature buck to hunt, that's his core area every year, is very slim.
Very slim. Maybe it's a good rut spot and they transition through, but I don't think you know what deer you're killing.
And those do exist. Yeah. I mean, sometimes there's, like I said, in November, it's about the spot.
But I don't think you know which deer you're hunting at that point. You're in there because mature buck's likely going to come through that funnel.
Yeah. And I'll take that.
I will. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. It's just, I mean, I think everybody has to understand what are they working with, and then how can they utilize that to manage their expectations, because that's what it's going to come down to.
I think I'll get a crack at that deer this year.
That deer will be easily into the 80s this year if he's still alive.
He's had a rack since then.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he was. I think he'll be 6 this year. I think he was 4 that year, 5 last year. He'll be 6 this year.
That could be a giant.
Yeah, 180-inch giant.
Pretty boy could still be out there.
Be gnarly.
We've seen older deer.
Oh yeah.
What did he be? 7?
7 or 8.
7 or 8.
8. So. Oh, we're starting, man. It is like I said, it's mid-June at this point. Things are rolling, velvet's growing.
Oh, here's a quick timeline if you want to do it. I know you got to get right in here, but June 9th today. Before or right around June 15th,
which is when this will drop,
I'm going to plan to brush hog my food plots. Full transparency, I haven't touched anything. They're all sitting there. I'm going to go in and brush hog all my food plots. They're just weeds and stuff now. I don't have the time Sturgis does to spray all my stuff 6 times a year. I wish I did.
I know, me too.
So by June 15th, I'll have everything cut, which gives me 2 weeks of a little bit of regrowth, which you want for spraying. I'm going to glide everything by August 1st to the first week in August, somewhere in there, which gives me 2.5 to 3 weeks to planting. And I want to plant brassicas, or any kind of a fall food plot in those last 2 weeks of July. I found it in our region is the best.
So wait, you're going to spray by July 1, you mean?
Yep. Is that not what I said?
You said August 1.
Yeah. Sorry, I was wrong about that. So cut by June 15th, spray by August 1st. Sorry. Why am I messing that up?
July 1st.
Cut by June 15th, Spray by July 1st.
Plant by mid-July.
Plant third-ish week of July.
Depending on weather. Here we go. Letting it rip.
I got 14 cameras out the other day.
I know, that's awesome. I've been starting to reactivate some. My new clover plot's coming in real good behind the house. Like, it's happening, man. We're starting to get some velvet. You and I were exchanging velvet picks last night.
Victory arrows got shipped. I should have some of those here soon, so I can get Dad's bow set up. If you need arrows too, those are your RIP 300s.
Yeah, I might need some. Yeah, we're on it, man. Well, cool. We appreciate everyone listening to episode 78 of HUNTR Podcast. We've got, so if you're listening to this, we've got next week, we have, JP France.
Yeah, Monday.
Who's a Mississippi Stater, former baseball player at Mississippi State and Tulane.
Was he AAA for the Braves?
Astros?
Astros?
Yeah, AAA for the Astros.
Big bow hunter reached out, wants to be on the podcast. We said, sure, why not?
He's a Mississippi State Bulldog, why not? So,
Go Dogs.
Yeah. So, yeah, we've got some cool stuff coming up. And, keep checking out our social. We got stuff cranking. Hopefully, we'll be sharing some velvet picks soon.
Heck yeah, man.
All right, we'll talk later.
See ya. I mean, later.
It take me